Friends, in this episode of Dumb Fuck R Us, we have Joanne Bedford. She is 37. Mark Twigg was 42. They had been living together for about 21 years. See, they lived in the greater Manchester area and they had 4 children together. Both of them had clean records, no previous convictions. They lived what appeared to be ordinary lives. But you know and I know, nothing is ever what it seems. See, beneath the surface, a perfect storm of poor decisions and ignored warnings was building. The couple had a history of keeping dogs and other animals. When their children were born, a health visitor gave them standard advice that many new parents receive: never leave a child alone with dogs. I mean, to be fair, you should never leave a child alone anyway, but particularly with dogs. I mean, it's simple guidance. It seems kind of obvious, but as we'll see, this warning would prove tragically prophetic. In 2017, there was an early sign of trouble. See, a dog one of the families was caring bit the eldest son. He was 6 at the time. The wound would become infected. It should have been a wake-up call, but it wasn't. Now, the person in question, young Daniel was born in January 2019. Daniel is the victim. Now, at the time of all of this, he was 3 years old. He was curious about the world around him. In March 2022, the family moved to Carr Farm, a property owned by a man named Matthew Brown. Now, the arrangement was quite simple. The family would live in the farmhouse at a nominal rent, in exchange for looking after the security of the property and all the dogs that lived there. So these weren't the family pets, they were just looking after the pets. These were guard dogs, animals specifically kept to protect the property, known for barking and jumping up on people. Now, a little secret, I am afraid of animals. Not afraid, but if I see a cat at someone's house or a dog, I kind of move away or I don't know what to do. Yes, I know, I'm a pussy. There's no reason for me to tell you that, but I thought, why not? Now, the neighbors next door had actually built a high fence around their property specifically to protect themselves from Matthew Brown's dogs, and that should tell you something about the reputations of these animals. The main dogs in question were Sid, a male cane corso, and Tiny, a female South African boerboel. But apparently they were large, powerful animals. A cane corso can weigh up to 110 pounds. Now, Mark took on specific responsibilities. He bought food for the dogs, fed them, gave them water, and cleaned out their pens. The family even kept Tiny in their farmhouse for a period of time. They dealt with complaints from neighbors and dogs escaping. But here's where the story becomes troubling. See, the warning signs were subtle. They were glaring, repeated, and impossible to miss. In March 2020, Matthew Brown's ex-wife was bitten by a dog on the farm. The dogs lived in what experts would later describe as poor conditions. There were insanitary pens, no exercise outside their enclosures. They were confined in what experts called an unrewarding, barren environment. Research shows dogs kept in such conditions can develop pathological or abnormal behavior. I think this is one of the reasons I never had a pet, all the upkeep that comes with it. But that's just me. These dogs in particular had previously escaped from the property. They'd been involved in fights. They were powerful, and as the court would later determine, they were not easy to control. Now, on March 25, 2022, less than 2 months before Daniel's death, the RSPCA, the British body on collecting animals, they had an inspector who visited the property and gave an explicit warning. This inspector said, look, these dogs are crazy. They might end up biting your children. They might end up taking the life of one of your kids. Yeah, the inspector literally said this. The family's neighbor used even more direct language in a text message sent to Joanne Bedford. She called Tiny a ticking time bomb, a bit aggressive, and needs careful handling. Mark himself told the neighbor Tiny was nasty, and if you annoy the dog, she will rip your head off. And regarding the setup at the farmhouse, because this is crucial to understanding how the tragedy occurred, Sid and Tiny were kept in a pen at the side of the house. But here's the problem. The family was using this dog pen as their way in and out of the house. To enter or exit their home, the children had to walk right past these powerful, aggressive dogs. The door to the pen nearest to the house was secured by carabiner clip. They were not using a padlock, so obviously it wasn't secure enough. And here's the thing. They knew Daniel was attracted to dogs. They knew he was curious about them. Joanne later admitted to police and a doctor Daniel had at least tried to remove the clip once before. They never upgraded the security, they never installed a padlock, they continued to use a carabiner clip that determined a 3-year-old might be able to open it, as in Daniel. So, the day in question, May the 15th, 2022. It started like many other days. Mark went to work. Joanne, who was in the late stages of pregnancy, was home with the children. What happened next is where Joanne's account became inconsistent and where the evidence painted a damning picture. She, her daughter, and Daniel had been out in the garden when Daniel somehow got into the yard. She claimed she had left Daniel for no more than a minute or two, to which he managed to open the carabiner clip and he entered the pen where Sid and Tiny were. Now, what happened in that pen is almost too horrific to describe. He had teeth marks to his neck, consistent with repeated biting and rapid shaking. He likely suffered a blunt force head injury that rendered him unconscious. His sister Kia witnessed the immediate aftermath. Imagine being a child and seeing your little brother in that condition, watching what the dogs were doing to him. She ran to get help from the neighbor, who described her as frantic. Joanne discovered what happened and tried to resuscitate Daniel. The footage from that day shows her acute distress, and it's genuine. There's no question that she loved her son, that she was horrified by what happened, and she tried desperately to save him. Paramedics treated Daniel at the scene. He was rushed to Manchester Children's Hospital, but the injuries were too severe. He was pronounced dead at 3:30 that day. A 3-year-old boy, dead because the adults responsible for his safety were ignored. They'd been giving warning after warning. All they had to do was put a lock on the door. Joanne and Mark were charged with 2 offenses: manslaughter by gross negligence and being in charge of a dog that was dangerously out of control. In June and July of this year, 2025, after a trial at Manchester Crown Court, the jury reached their verdict. They acquitted both defendants of manslaughter, but they unanimously convicted both of them of the dangerous dog offense. This is an important distinction. The jury found that while they were negligent during all of this, it didn't quite reach the very threshold required for gross negligent manslaughter. In a sense, I can understand. It's the dogs that did it, not them. But they absolutely found them guilty in being charged of the dogs they knew were dangerous, dogs that were out of control. Even though Mark wasn't present at the time of the attack, the jury found he remained in charge of Sid and Tiny. He had general control of the premises and the dogs. He was responsible for the security arrangements. He was responsible for the precautions needed to protect the children. He exposed his children to serious risk. So, in October of 2025, Mr. Justice Care delivered his sentencing remarks, and they were worth examining because they reveal the impossible balance judges must strike in cases like this. The judge acknowledged the couple's suffering. He said, "You have both lost your beloved son. You, Miss Bedford, saw the immediate aftermath of the attack and tried to resuscitate Daniel." He noted that Mark was a man of few words and less expressive. The judge did not underestimate his feelings. However, all the pain and suffering at the loss of your son and the suffering for the other children does not change the fact that you did bugger all. The judge didn't say that. I'm saying that. Yes, you did not wish for this to happen, but you knew the dogs were dangerous. And why didn't you do anything about it? Why didn't you add more precautions like a lock or whatever? Only one reason: because you're a bunch of lazy bastards. It's not that they didn't want to do it, they were just too lazy to do it. The judge found that both defendants had shown medium culpability. Not the highest level, but serious nonetheless. Multiple warning signs had been ignored. The dogs were in poor conditions and in inadequate security measures. But what helped these two muppets is that according to the judge, they were of good character and no criminal history. They were genuinely remorseful. They had lost their son. Joanne herself suffered from PTSD and depression related to Daniel's death. Mark had health issues, including back problems and possible autism. The judge also considered that imprisoning both parents could result in their children being taken into private care. So, the judge sentenced Joanne to 3.5 years in prison. Mark received 2 years and 8 months. They were both disqualified from having custody of any dog for 15 years. Now, under the sentencing, they would serve up to half their sentences before being released on license back into the community. So essentially a 1.5 years each, give or take. And the only way to conclude on this case is what the fuck were you doing? But that child, man, that must have been a slow, painful death. A dog attacks you on the neck, on the legs, or the arms. God knows if the dog chewed some of the limbs or, I mean, it's just wow. Why don't you comment? Tell me what you think.